Have you ever thought about like how these, ancient faiths, how they deal with like modern day conflicts?
Yeah.
It's really interesting, right? And the True Orthodoxy movement within the Eastern Orthodox Church, it's a great example of that. I mean, don't worry if you're not really up on all the details.
Uh-huh.
That's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
This deep dive. We're going to like try to unpack it all together. Right. So imagine this. It's like the early 1900s.
Early 20th century.
Yeah, early 20th century, thank you. And the world is kind of like reeling from the Russian Revolution.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
Huge. The Bolsheviks are, in charge, and you've got these like traditional structures of society, like even the church, they're dealing with these crazy challenges.
And it's impossible to overstate how important Russia was in the Orthodox world back then.
It was the center. It was like the spiritual heart. So when that gets, rocked to the core, it sends shockwaves everywhere.
It's like the ground is shaking and everyone's looking for something like solid to grab onto.
Yeah.
And that's when, you have this group within the Orthodox Church. They start saying, hey, we have some serious concerns here. They felt like the main church trying to, I don't know, navigate all this craziness was like straying from the real deal, becoming too, I don't know, flexible, too modern. And that's kind of where True Orthodoxy starts from.
Yeah, and you know what's so interesting about this whole thing? It wasn't just some, heady theological debate. I mean, don't get me wrong, those were definitely happening. But really at the core of it, this was about how people react when everything feels uncertain, when everything's changing so fast, Imagine, like, your whole world is falling apart, and then the thing that's supposed to be your rock, your faith, that seems to be shifting too,
Right.
For a lot of folks clinging to tradition, this idea of an unchanging church, that was like a lifeline in a storm.
Yeah, it's like that basic human need for something solid when everything else is going haywire, especially when you're talking about, faith and salvation.
Exactly.
And the source you shared, it really focuses on this one guy, Patriarch Meletius Metaxakis. Now, I'm not a history buff, but even I was kind of blown away by how, like, what he did just threw a match on this already tense situation, changing the church calendar, being accused of heresy, and then there's the whole thing with him and the Soviets. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Those were not, like, minor details, especially for people who were all about tradition. To really get why this was such a big deal, you got to understand what unbroken continuity means in Orthodoxy.
Okay.
It's not just about following the rules. It's deeper. It's this, like, visceral connection back to the very beginning of the church, this direct line going all the way back to the apostles.
It's like they're holding on to a piece of living history.
Right.
This real link to like the roots of everything they believe.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how even small changes would feel like, I don't know, cracks in that foundation.
Exactly. And when Metaxakis, made these changes like that calendar thing, people weren't just like, oh, he's updating things.
Yeah.
For many, it was like he was aligning the church way too close with, well, the secular world, with the Soviets. And the Soviets, let's be honest, weren't exactly known for being, super religious.
Right.
And that, on top of the heresy accusations that were already swirling around, it felt like a betrayal. And this is what really pushed those who became true Orthodox even further away.
So it's more than just a disagreement, right? It sounds like things got, well, intense.
Yeah.
The source even mentions true Orthodox believers being persecuted, even killed, especially over in Greece.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
And that shows you how deeply held these beliefs were on both sides.
Yeah.
This wasn't just some, intellectual debate club.
Right.
It was about the very essence of their faith, the one true way to be saved, as they saw it. And history teaches us that when people believe that strongly, even within the same faith, things can get, well, they can get ugly.
It's a good reminder of how powerful these beliefs can be. But here's something I find really interesting. True Orthodoxy might seem small compared to the main Orthodox Church, but the source hints that it might be growing.
That's right. And that's why you can't just look at the numbers. Those demographic trends, especially in religion, they can tell you a lot about what's really going on. And in this case, we're seeing potential growth, especially in places like Romania and Greece. It seems like that longing for a more, maybe even a stricter way of practicing orthodoxy, it really speaks to a growing group of believers.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's not just, the big global thing. The source, it gets really personal. The author talks about their own, like, internal struggle with this whole schism.
Yeah.
They're obviously really plugged into the Orthodox world, wrestling with these same questions about tradition, about change, about what actually makes a church true.
Yeah, it really struck me how they were like going back and forth on this idea that, yeah, you can find salvation in the World Orthodox Church, but then there's this but. Like they're trying to make sense of their faith, but they've got these big concerns about where they see the church going.
It's like walking a tightrope, theologically speaking.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people find themselves in that same spot. Can you disagree with parts of your church, even the people in charge, but still believe that it's the way to salvation?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is.
I mean, it's easy to say, if you don't like it, just leave. But faith's not always that simple, right? Especially with something as old and deeply rooted as orthodoxy.
Exactly. And this is where really understanding the nitty-gritty of these theological differences is important. Because for those true Orthodox believers, it's not just about disagreeing with, one rule or even what one leader did.
Right.
It goes deeper than that. It gets into what they see as absolutely essential for salvation.
Okay.
Many of them believe that the changes that were made, especially those that they see as being, influenced by the Soviets, those represent a break, a real break in that chain of apostolic succession we talked about.
So it's not just that they're upset. They believe that these changes actually damage the church's spiritual authority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like a crack in the foundation. And it makes you think about the human cost of all this, Because the author, they tell this story about a close friend, a priest, who makes this huge decision to leave the World Orthodox Church.
Wow.
He joins a true Orthodox community, and you could just feel how heavy that decision weighs on the author.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just some intellectual thing for them. This priest, he wasn't just responsible for his own soul, right?
Oh.
He's got a whole congregation. It makes you think, what would make someone risk so much to make such a big change after, years, maybe even a whole life in a certain faith?
It's a huge deal. And that's where those theological differences, they stop being theoretical.
Yeah.
It's one thing to debate them, in the abstract. But when it comes down to the salvation of your soul and the souls of everyone you're responsible for as a priest, the stakes are about as high as they can get.
It's a powerful story. And it makes those theological debates really come alive, But it also makes me think what does this all mean in the bigger picture? The author talks about, hoping for reconciliation. Can these two groups, True Orthodoxy and the World Orthodox Church, can they find a way back to each other after all this?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't think there's an easy answer. But here's what I find so fascinating. This whole struggle, trying to hold on to tradition while also, adapting to change, it's like a recurring theme in religious history.
Right.
You see it over and over again. Groups break away because they feel like the core of their faith is being watered down. And they're willing to face being ostracized, even persecuted, to stand up for what they believe is the true path.
It's like that classic human dilemma, isn't it? Sticking with what's familiar versus moving with the times.
Exactly. And it seems like finding that balance, it's really tough, especially when you're talking about faith.
For sure.
And the way back to each other, if there is one, it usually depends on both sides really trying to understand each other. And, really understand, even empathize with where the other is coming from. It's not about saying, you're wrong, I'm right. It's about acknowledging that both sides are driven by deeply held beliefs. Can the World Orthodox Church, recognize and respond to those concerns about lost continuity without, sacrificing its own sense of, evolution? Can true Orthodoxy engage with the modern world without compromising what they believe in? Tough questions.
Yeah, really tough. It makes me think about something the author says toward the end. It's this subtle worry that if the World Orthodox Church is too gung-ho about changing, about bending to, whatever the modern world wants, does it risk losing the heart of its faith?
There it is again, that tension, right? And that's a question that goes way beyond just this one schism.
That's true.
Every faith, every institution really, has to deal with it. How do you stay true to your roots, to those core principles that have been around for centuries, and still be relevant in a world that's constantly changing?
Right, right. And there's no easy answer, is there? It's something everyone, every group has to figure out for themselves.
You got it. And, maybe that's the biggest takeaway from our deep dive today.
Yeah.
Whether you're, deeply connected to the Orthodox world or just interested in this whole, saga of faith and division, it reminds us that these questions about belief, tradition versus change, they don't have simple answers. They're conversations that continue. And wrestling with them thoughtfully, with an open mind, trying to understand different points of view, that's important for anyone who wants to really get themselves and the world around them.
I like that.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to chew on, and I bet our listeners feeling the same way. Who knows, maybe this will inspire you to check out the history of religious schisms a bit more, or even take a deep dive into the world of Eastern Orthodoxy. Until next time, keep those brain cells buzzing.